Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Genius Wednesdays. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. I am Kristina Bruhahn, the COO of Plain Genius, and I'm joined here today with our head of market research and our Genius Network panel. Today's agenda is going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about the major divergence of the have and the have-nots and what that means for crypto. How the current economic situation is kind of kicking the proverbial can down the road in regards to coronavirus. We see the second wave of coronavirus happening. We're concerned about, the general populace, severe depression, bigger issues other than the major economic ramifications that, may take people 10 plus years to come back from, decades or even a lifetime. And that kind of leans to the premise that, yeah, Amazon's at an all-time high, BTC is up, gold is up, great. But if you don't have $1 to buy top ramen, you don't really care about the stock price. And there is kind of a rule book for pandemics, but we need to kind of discuss, the bigger ramifications of what this means. And this is kind of a common topic for us. The other piece that we'll talk about is market analysis. BTC was up around 10K. We think that there's some corrections, that there might be overbought due to the halving. But the really interesting thing is we're starting to see decoupling. We're starting to see some projects that are non-tethered or starting to break away from the Bitcoin up and downs. And then Steve will be doing a spotlight, and Dustin will, of course, be doing his section of Hash It Out. So with that, we have a lot to unpack. I will turn it over to Mr. Steve Quan for the market analysis.
Thanks, Kristina. I'm Steve Quan. I'm going to share a couple charts as I normally do. Let's see. Everyone can see these? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Let me just move this over. All right. So, oops. So let's look at, first, this is the S&P. I just want to point this out as I think it generally is the most important chart. And as you can see, its volatility is compressed tremendously. And this was before coronavirus. This was the low. This is now. I wrote an arrow. If you can see it, that's just an opinion. Now, I'm going to move to, I guess this leads into what Kristina has said and we talked about yesterday with, I guess, Amazon being at or near an all-time high. As you can see, before coronavirus, during, and the after, Amazon has since traded an all-time high. Now, I picked some other equities that are large cap of a variety. I know this is generally a cryptocurrency and blockchain show, but I just want to point out the divergences in pretty much all asset classes. So take a look at Amazon. Now let's take a look at Boeing. As you can see, that's barely above the lows. Now, I get it, not as many planes in the air, obvious, but let's take a look at some other things. Here's Facebook. It's almost fully recovered. Notice the high of the recovery was 2 days ago. Notice the high of Amazon was a week ago, but let's take a look further. How about Walmart? Well, it's since recovered. So amazingly, a quote-unquote brick and mortar store has recovered more than fully, but consumers aren't shopping in stores. So what does that lead me to believe? Well, you can make your own inferences, but it appears that people are still willing to buy on the internet. I know that crazy thing, that www. Let's go to another one. Hog. No, this isn't Lean Hogs. This is actually Harley Davidson, another product that's based on, I guess, a luxury item. And as we can see, that has not recovered nearly as much. Here, let's keep going down. How about Archer Daniels Midland, a food and grain processor located in central Illinois, their headquarters? Well, they haven't had as big a recovery either. So let's move on. How about Caterpillar? Well, we're seeing that same type of action where it's not getting that same recovery. How about the VIX? Okay, well, it hit a high of 90, but this is the June future, so we'll call it 57. It's 34. Moving on, here is the GSCI, which is the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. I'm just showing this instead of showing a bunch of different commodities that people may not fully be aware of. But you can see that it actually traded lower after everything else made lows. Let's move on to this. All right, I have this new game. It's called Guess the Chart. This is currently $9,082, and this one is currently, sorry, 8,942. I'm going to go back to this. So take a look here. Take a look here. Do they look similar to you? If not, maybe they should. This is Bitcoin versus US dollars. As you can see, 3 days ago hit its recent high, almost fully recovered, but not totally. Now let's look here. 89.42. Eerily, almost the same price. It almost fully recovered, but didn't exactly. When was that high made? Well, that was made Sunday night, the same time as Bitcoin was 999.9999999. All right, moving on. I'm going to try to move this along so others can talk. I know there's a lot of things regarding what Kristina said, where I guess this is kind of the lead into the haves and have-nots. If you can't afford food or you're having trouble paying for housing or lighting or whatever necessity you need, the price of Bitcoin or the GSCI or Amazon is probably not very important to you. I guess if one is not living and can't survive, then the price of certain assets are less important. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say when, as the VIX increases, whenever it does again, you know, these things gather a lot of steam together. Like Bitcoin didn't go from 4,000 to 9,000 by people selling. There were more the buyers were more aggressive. Just as gold did, just as S&P did. So I'm just pointing all these out. Now, I want to show you, this is Bitcoin Cash, probably one of the most correlated generally to Bitcoin, but as we see, since coronavirus, 1 BCH used to be worth 0.045 Bitcoin. Now it's 0.026. So that actually hasn't recovered at all. It's actually making new lows. Let's take a look at one other, a masternode, probably the key in the masternode space, Dash or digital cash. And as you can see, in Bitcoin terms, that's making new lows also. So my closing thought is Dogecoin versus ETH. Now I know this may make some people wonder, okay, is this guy actually intelligent or crazy? But I'd like to highlight a couple of these things. Unlike deflationary cryptocurrencies, which I'll say Doge is one, there is no end, there is no cap. Now, is that good or bad? I'll let the markets decide. I'm going to point out something else. Ethereum, currently, there is no hard cap on Ethereum. So my closing thought is Doge and ETH actually share many of the same characteristics in the markets. Obviously not in the technology, but I've been told for many years Doge would not survive. I've been told Ethereum is misused as a cryptocurrency and remains being misused. I've also heard other negative comments about infinite supply, and I would say this to the pundits. How is it that ETH has remained the number 2 or 3 market cap blockchain in the past years? And how is it that Ethereum Classic and Dogecoin, things with unlimited supplies, continue to be in the top 30 most valued blockchains? For disclosure, I do have ownership in all 3, and I'm not saying it's a bullish or bearish call. I'm simply saying that the market derives what a value is at any given second. And people that say Ethereum is being misused, how do you know what I'm using it for? Like, if I buy gold or I buy crude oil, what I do with it is really my business. So just because the price of Ethereum is traded on exchange doesn't mean it's being misused at all. It's an asset just like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, crude, Harley Davidson, whatever it is, and it's just traded. So I simply think that labeling things for failure, sometimes those things that are counted out so many times end up being the most successful ones. And on that note, I will pass the microphone back to Kristina. Let me
Thank you, Steve.
share my screen. Sorry.
So I'll turn this over to the panel here, to Oz and Samson and anyone else who wants to jump in. I'd like to talk about the haves and have-nots. I think that's going to kind of be the theme for today. And to Steve's point, he's just basically laying the casework that we haven't fully recovered. We know that we're heading into another big stressor with the second wave of coronavirus coming across the globe. And just interested to hear your guys' thoughts about how folks could protect themselves or the things they need to be thinking of right now.
Yeah, it was interesting he brought up ADM, which is Archer Daniels Midland. So a couple things are going to happen, and these are, again, it goes back to my marker before was pork bellies and livestock feed. One of my new markers is the availability of ethanol. And one of the reasons for this is that one of the largest produced items in the United States right now is hand sanitizer. We've got about three months of ethanol feedstocks in the United States before we start running into a problem. Now, you can produce ethanol from hemp, and that's something that I've seen one producer doing. But if you consider the fact that the United States government is ordering millions of bottles of hand sanitizer a week and millions of gallons of hand sanitizer a week, we're going to start running into critical acquisition problems in a very short period of time. And so the second thing to look at is where are we in terms of the impact curves. So the one thing I had wanted to pull up was the 1918 flu pandemic graph. And
I think Steve needs to stop sharing his screen.
Yeah, well, I could do it later, but it's so the basic gist is this. In 1918, we had two bumps. We had the first bump, which was it was a small. I mean, it wasn't small or insignificant, but it basically was, hundreds of thousands of people affected. Now, what we're seeing now echoes what happened in 1918, because people have to get back to work. No one has unlimited foodstuffs. Your children have to be supported. At the same point in time, there's other types of engagement and social engagement that need to happen to keep people necessarily part and parcel of society. All of these things are pushing or in their on different aspects of different communities across the country, and these huge pressures are going to excuse me, open the door for a second wave. Now, that second wave is going to be cross-correlated with a limitation in the market of access to certain goods. Hand sanitizer is becoming a problem. President Trump has already talked about making, and this was policy that was bipartisanly supported but introduced by Marco Rubio, of putting some sort of sanctions on China, one for the concentration camps that they have for Muslims, and two for the steps that they have now taken in terms of destroying churches, arresting parishioners, and rewriting the Bible so that it supports communist ideals. So, these kinds of threats to civil rights and civil liberties, and really the rights of the faithful, coupled with the fact that we're looking at a hot summer, which we are going to see a corona downtick to a degree. You're going to see hot spots across the country where one person with corona interacts with a bunch of other folks. You're going to see the Apple-Google initiative try and work, but there's big problems in sort of pushing something like that out. You're going to have to force either a firmware update, or you're going to have to force some sort of OS update in order to get that on everyone's phones. Not everyone's going to do that. And also, not everyone has the hardware to support some of these new apps. And we've seen this with iPhone 4 going to 5 and things that have happened with 6s and 7s and 8s with the rollout of the 10. Then on top of that, we're going to have a limitation in terms of the access of masks. So China has started to block the exportation of the N95. The KN95 medical, which was also limited, but you need to purchase those in the United States, and that's one of the ones that's being sold, has Chinese suppliers marketing these things or marking the boxes as non-medical. And so the challenge that comes up inside of there is that when you ship those to the United States, you've just created a tort law issue. And states aren't buying them, hospitals aren't buying them. So you've got all this weird inventory that's sitting around. And then lastly, 3M is ramping up, but 3M has had a tremendous amount of fraud that has happened with them. The purchasing ecosystem is fragmented across the country. The acquisition ecosystem on the state level is still operating in ways where they were purchasing a couple years ago, and it just doesn't work with the speed or expediency that's necessary to get things to market. And so you've got all of these factors that are going to culminate about the same time when we start going into early fall, and we see the flu cycle that we typically have, coupled with a secondary build of corona. And you also have to consider that the strains are mutating. In New York, they've stopped reporting a lot of this stuff. They've stopped reporting on the mass graves, but we have at least 5 different variants of corona in the city. So let's finalize with what you had asked about, and just all of this is really kind of baseline information to get there. I see that cities and rural communities where you have a lot of people that are working blue collar or white collar jobs have most of the risk associated with this. The MTA has had dozens of people die. The police department, NYPD, has had a couple thousand cops out, and we've had hundreds of cops, or I think dozens to 100 cops die. Same thing with the fire department, same thing with EMTs. So the impact on the working person in America, I think, is relatively significant. And those folks that we consider essential workers, it's going to continue to be significant. Folks who are making under $25 an hour are going to be hardest hit. And that's because they're going to have continued exposure in terms of the jobs that they perform in order to maintain the livelihood and operational capacity of different cities. And who are these people I'm talking about? Average salary for an EMT is 11 to 18 bucks. Average salary for a nurse practitioner outside of New York City varies by the state, but the nurse practitioners in many cases are making over 100 bucks an hour. We have a problem with morticians. Right now, the backlog of cremation is 6 weeks in New York. If you don't claim your body within 3 to 6 days, you don't know where it's going to go. And they've been talking about tagging and storing and this and that. If you end up in a mass grave, you're never getting out. I don't care what de Blasio says. I don't care what kind of poppycock nonsense the governor says. These types of problems that we're having in New York are going to be echoed across large population dense centers in the United States. Herd immunity is something that could potentially be there, but I think there has to be a better strategy than treating this in a way like smallpox, treating this in a way like the Spanish flu, and in a way treating this like polio, because it's got a lot of aspects of horror that come with it, the same way that polio did. We've got Broadway actors here that have holes in their lungs now, have body parts amputated because of blood clots. Everyone who's getting this in the 30s and early 40s is at risk of a stroke now. So I think there's going to be a secondary impact of that inside of society, and that's probably going to be between fall and spring of 2021. And we also may end up with a third effect of this, and this is going to decimate the population. And the decimation is not necessarily in terms of sheer numbers, but it's in terms of sheer access and the will to do things. So, for example, farm workers, right? Farm workers are having trouble right now in terms of harvesting. And so they're changing their business models to get to basically go direct to consumer or direct to retail. They're actually cutting out a lot of these supply chains. And I think those things are going to change. At the same point in time, we've been talking about blockchain systems that need to come in for healthcare and the Fed systems that are going to come in. And lastly, I think that, now there's the political will to get past some of the pork barrel stuff that was in there inside of some of these spending bills. Pelosi had held up the CARES Act by stuffing the Kennedy Center in there and Planned Parenthood. And I understand people's want for these types of things, but you shouldn't be holding up, the lending of billions of dollars to Americans at risk and small businesses that need to keep people employed just because of your special interests. The same thing was happening again, and we've had multiple holdups, but we've had Samson, a total of almost $7 trillion worth of injection into the economy thus far. We talked about multiple injections previously. I think you're looking at easily moving us into an additional $6 to $10 trillion worth of capital injections over the course of the next year. And then I think correlated with that is going to be the move to USDT, the move to as well as the United States cryptocurrency, which most likely is going to be gold backed. And also considering the fact that, you know, an ounce of gold right now can buy a significant portion. It's at 1.6, I think, again, can buy a significant portion of the S&P. But if you look at the S&P chart, all right, if we look at the S&P chart right here, can you guys see that? Yep. So if you, every time you see one of these little thumb doohickeys like that, which is where this is going at the end of the chart right now, you're looking at probably an uptick. And so what's kind of interesting is you look at this inside of 2016, you had an uptick, downtick. I think there's a lot of different market factors at play here that could give different variable indications over the next 2 months. But what I will say is that we are most likely, with the correlation of where things are going from a multitude of differential assets, from everything that Steve presented, into a space where we are going to have definite growth of a lot of the stocks associated with these things. And a lot of that's due to the fact that the commodity prices are going to spike beyond things that you've seen before. I mean, Purell hand sanitizer, 16 ounce right now, is retailing for 16 bucks. Okay. That's on the retail market. The wholesale cost that I'm getting some of these things that are between, you know, I can get them between $2.90 and $8. And you know, people are buying out entire lots of $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. Margins are kind of slim in some of these things, but at the same point in time, we're dealing with test kit challenges. I have 2 swab manufacturers that I've talked to in the past couple of days. If you guys aren't aware, I'm doing a lot of PPE and blockchain work now. And the swab manufacturers are selling to their distributors. These swabs cost anywhere between $1 to $5. They're selling them for like 15 bucks a pop. So the distributors are price gouging. Same thing that happened at 3M's distributors is going to happen to them. And then Adrienne Ashley talks about this a lot, but she calls them joker brokers, because there's a layer. I mean, you'll get a deal, you'll find a buyer, and then there's like 6 layers of brokers in between there. And everyone's looking for their 10, 20% inside of each deal. And no one's willing to flex, and no one's willing to understand that half the time that this is stuff that's going for hospitals. So I think unless the Department of Justice comes down a little harder on people who are charging over 20% margins, and a lot of them are, we're, you know, not going to have a good time in terms of a lot of accessibility of PPE product. But I think, you know, there's some blockchain things that we're talking about, some stuff I know, Kristina, you know, you're planning and announcing in the next couple of weeks. Maybe there's some utility there. But the same things that you see inside of every pandemic, the same things you see after a hurricane, the same things you saw with $10 bottles of water are now becoming sort of status quo. In a world where, you know, disrupted supply chains are going to affect the most economically impoverished, the folks who are the front line of this, who are the essential workers, are continuing to take death tolls that they shouldn't. And on the state level, we have a lot of cries, you know, by governors, including mine, Cuomo, who talks a big game about how much money they spend on this and that and everything else. But, you know, if you're spending more money on entitlements than you are in actual services to citizens, and that's typically where it has been going. And then every single time something happens, you say, unless the Fed does this kind of massive bailout, well, nothing's going to happen. You really have to look at where the mess is. You know, de Blasio could have cut the school bus contract. That's $800 million. De Blasio could have asked for, but, yep, sorry.
We're gonna have to wrap it up so we can have other people talk, man.
Sorry, you asked about something that I'm like really passionate about, so.
I love it. I love it. I do want to pivot over to Samson. Samson, in a nutshell, the haves and have-nots as the air gets worse out there, and you know, second wave is coming. Things than just Corona are going to exist, you know, in the next 10 years or so. This is a complete overhaul of restructuring the world as we know it. Samson Williams, what are you?
You know, sometimes I listen to Oz and I wonder whether or not we're on the same planet, but I love what he's talking about. I just think that for the normal human being, meeting basic needs, it's going to be a challenge. And so that will just be continue to be a challenge, and you're just going to see the differentiation between the haves and have-nots. As I was telling people, Bitcoin doesn't solve unemployment. Cryptocurrencies don't solve unemployment. And so you're going to continue to see the gulf between the haves and the have-nots, particularly with the most recent money grabs, because Oz and I are looking at the same data, but from two completely different perspectives. Because when he talks about entitlement spending, I'm looking at what is entitlement spending compared to
that's supporting illegal immigrants and paying for people who are taking jobs in the Bronx.
And so, first, there's no such thing as an illegal immigrant. You might be
There is.
Yeah.
My parents were legal immigrants. They were sponsored by a steel company, and we had to put up a $10,000 bond for every single one of our relatives.
And so it's super
Oz,
cool.
I'm going to jump in really quick and just baseline for everyone. Oz, you got a big chunk of time. We're going to let Samson rebuttal, and I'm going to throw my piece in here. You're going to need a solution of immigration policy for migrant farm workers if you're going to have a hope at being able to. We need to treat all things as a supply chain.
Absolutely.
So, Samson, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and so when we talk about entitlement spending, and so we're not, Oz skips over how much money do we give to Wall Street and financial institutions. And when we give this money, we're making loans, we're making grants basically, and we're not taking equity. We should flip the switch on that. If you're a sophisticated investor, if you're a big financial institution, but you can't budget to maintain your business after a very short breakdown, but Kristina, she's expected to have some type of fiduciary responsibility for her life, then if you're a sophisticated investor, you deserve to get wiped out because you're sophisticated enough to be in the deal, you're sophisticated enough to get wiped out. Two, if you're that big business, you should go through bankruptcy, get restructured, because very rarely is it the employees that go anywhere. If your business is viable, your employees will still be around. That's just basic. And so every time we talk about entitlements, if you're a company and you need public funds in the tunes of billions, you might not want to say you're nationalized, it's too much socialism, then make me an equity shareholder. Let's just call it what it is, equity crowdfunding, because if you take public money, it's exactly what you're doing. And you said, you used the term foreign workers you said foreign workers need help. There are not, Americans are super lazy. They don't make up the majority of foreign workers. That's the difference between farmers and workers. So we really need to know that words matter when we talk about these things.
But that's a classification.
And we also need to be aware that without the undocumented folks here who are paying into Social Security was supposed to go broke around 2035-ish. That's been sped up a little bit. We actually need that young blood. We need that infusion, not only of human capital, but also of taxes. And so that's where most people are like, oh, let's just turn the blind eye and say that these people don't provide so much and provide so much for the American way of life. What I do think we're on the precipice of for the regular folks is universal basic income. Because right now with the stimulus money that's gone out, we're really seeing that the first question is, hey, if we can just print ourselves out of a recession, why didn't we try this before? It's like, if we're just gonna do it, let's do it. Because we are somewhere around $7 trillion in stimulus funds. We're probably gonna hit 12 trillion-ish or so. So basically we're saying we've been messing around in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Let's take the $6 trillion we spent over there and let's spend it in a quarter, twice in America. So it's like, it is a staggering sum of money. And I love that what happened to the
question at that point. I just really quick to ask you a question. I want to know if your brain works the same way that mine does. This second wave that's coming, all I can tell that they have a solution to do is print more money. They can't lower the Fed rates. They can't, there's no innovation to do anything other than print more money until it seems they get this digital dollar thing figured out. So I don't see them getting real creative outside of just printing more money for the foreseeable future.
So we can't really get creative because printing more money in the US digital dollar, I think is the thing I take most umbrage with you for Oz. You skipped over why we're having a supply chain issue.
I told you we're
If-
having a supply chain issue. What I mean, please
Yeah,
don't
we're having
dictate how I
no.
talk.
Why we're having a supply chain issue? We're having a supply chain issue because failure of leadership, first and foremost. We took
No,
all the
we had a
pandemic
failure of
plans
the supply
and
chains
threw them out.
overseas. Failure of the
Uno
supply chains
momento, we're gonna have
overseas.
to go back. We're gonna have to go back and forth here. We're gonna have to kind of volley. So you got to let him finish, and then you can have your rebuttal.
So
Sure.
part of the reason we had failure of supply chain overseas is failure of leadership. In January, February, and March, when we could have been actually doing something, standing up. Oh, I forget the gentleman who's the whistleblower from HSS. He's talking about a N95 mask in Fort Worth, Texas. We can fact check me on this. That could have been producing 1.5 million N95 masks, but they just decided they didn't want to do it. So we categorically exported manufacturing overseas for everything. Manufacturing went overseas for medical stuff that went to India. And now through our bully puppet, we decided, hey, we're going to try to bully you around. That doesn't work. That's just failure of leadership. So you've got to say, yes, we're going through all of these challenges with securing PPE for a variety of reasons. Number one is failure of leadership. Number two is we took all of our pandemic plans, pissed on them, and then took a dump. And we were like, let's just throw them all away. Let's just ignore it. And so that's why we're at our current quagmire. What I think we should focus on is what are the long-term effects of all this? So it's sort of interesting that JP Morgan made a deal with Coinbase and Gemini to be their banker. Mildly interesting. You can't beat them, join them. But what's more interesting, and Oz, occasionally, I know we're looking at the same data points, just from two different perspectives. One of us is drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit too much.
Bro, you need to stop with these accusations and the stereotyping. It's just unnecessary.
Oh, Oz, I'm going to accuse you of being wrong whenever you are wrong. And I'm not going to.
And then accuse me of that, but then don't you utilize language like that.
I'm not going to. So here's what I want to say is that you touched upon something and I was like, it's an inkling of truth. It's like you turned on the light, but the rest of the truth is in the shadows. Is what is the long-term impact on Medicare and Medicaid? Because many of these people that do serve, who are exposed to COVID, who do recover, they're going to have long-term effects. So when you have 1 million odd people who are exposed, you have however many deaths.
Correct.
Right now we're around 80,000 deaths. The people who are survivors, they're going to have long-term health effects. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at Social Security disability insurance, SSDI, what effect is that going to have on Medicaid and Medicare? And so this is going to be another interesting point where how do we solve this? Because capitalism, as it has evolved into be this beast that has consumed itself, then we'll have to look at large institutional changes. And here's the craziest, funniest part. If we look at the Green New Deal thrown out by AOC and those crazy kids, it is literally 4 times cheaper than what we spent in the last quarter.
Okay, so addressing a couple points there, I raised the issue of long-term blood clots, long-term disability. Medicaid is part and parcel of this, but a lot of people are covered by private health insurance, okay? And that's how things are. Right now,
a lot of people can't be covered by private health insurance because it's attached to their job, and we're at 30% unemployment.
Right, but a lot of people still have jobs. A lot of people still have jobs. A lot of people are still working from home. A lot of companies are diversifying. I think the larger impact there is going to be the commercial real estate. I think we need to.
I'm going to just jump in there and just make it real personal. I can't afford health insurance right now. I had it at the beginning of the year and I have no health insurance. And I'm working my tail off and I'm scared. And it hits that close to home. So just as you're kind of thinking through your rebuttal here, like we have.
No, I'm 100% with you. The Affordable Care Act and its collapse has led to a family of 4 in New York. If you want reasonably good insurance, it's $1,600 a month. I mean, I've got partial insurance right now, and we're moving to a different corporate policy. But that's the only way I'm going to have the same level of insurance that I had 10 years ago. It's absurdly expensive.
You know how to navigate that though. So like an average person, like me, an average person, like, you know, my social circle or something, they lose their health insurance. They don't know how to navigate it. There's a lot of education that's going to need to happen in this new kind of era as things are taken away from people that they have taken for granted, that they just kind of rely on, and all of a sudden it's not there. They don't know what to do. And it's bigger than just policy, and it's bigger than the Democrat versus Republicans. It's not what we're talking about here. It's huge. We need to kind of like dive into some solutions. I don't want us to bicker too much. I know you guys have varying opinions. That's why we love hearing from you guys. But it is about how do we collectively move forward. And you're right. You and I spent a lot of time talking about healthcare blockchains and PPE and getting food to people, and just anticipating that the rug is about to get yanked out from underneath everyone. They thought it was going to happen this time. It didn't, because of printing money. And, we're moving into an era where people are starting to feel safe, but they're not. The air is going to get worse, and there's going to be worse and worse things. So if society fundamentally has to shift, let's talk collectively about what that would look like.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I concur that we need a green program. I don't concur that it's necessarily what the DNC is proposing. Trump has alluded to 1 trillion trees to start. That's great. It's a good start. It has to be planted around the world. That could create a conservation corps like we had in the 30s. There's a need for
blockchain, green technologies moving forward. There's a ton of things happening in the green sector at the speed of now, right? We know that has to be a factor. We know that we're already getting data points back that no one driving is actually helping the environment. Yes, Steve Quan, I see you kind of raising a point over there. Yes, sir.
So someone involved in the Illinois Department of Health just messaged me, and they wanted me to put this out anonymously. And like I said, this is from a person in the Illinois Department of Health who wishes to remain anonymous. So I'm saying this with a grain of salt. And these are just some of the stats he sent me. Regarding Illinois, a total of 1,553 of the state's 3,241. I wish I could do a screen share, but it's on my phone. Deaths as of May 8th, or 48%, were tied to long-term care facilities. The impact of nursing homes is even more pronounced in the collar counties, in addition to the high, and I don't talk like this, so the high proportion of deaths in DuPage and McHenry. Lake County's LTC deaths, I think what he's trying to say is that 50% or more of the COVID-19 deaths related to LTCs in the downstate area all had 100% of their deaths to retirement homes. Now, I don't talk like that, so this isn't something that was just, but it's just info from them. I'm not saying it's not bullish or bearish or anything. I'm just passing along, and that was it. So I guess there's a belief that, I think you guys have touched on it many times, everyone on here, that the healthcare, and maybe that's something that needs working on. I guess that's kind of his point. I'm not making any inferences from that. And like I said, it's with a grain of salt I say that, so I'm just passing it on.
We've got a ton of problems.
So Oz, I just want to kind of frame that in a question here. Basically what Steve is saying is we have a resource loading problem with the global healthcare system, right? Like, when you're planning out a project and you know that you're going to have a pinch here and you can throw more resources at it, but you don't know where to go get your resources, right?
Yep.
So it's going to continue to be worse. And, we're going to see the metrics kind of, sorry guys, kind of thin out the geriatric side of things, and the long-term care and the retirement homes seem to be getting hit the hardest. From the healthcare side, and you and I have talked about this a lot, from my personal side of things, there's just not enough resources. What do we do about that now? And it's going to get worse over the next 10 years. Like, we're going to need to kind of ebb and flow and flex this out. And you can't just train 100,000 nurses overnight. No.
And to address a couple things, Samson said, look, this doesn't need to be so politicized. And this isn't an issue of right or left. This is an issue of what is actually going to happen and what's going on. If you want to talk about the illegal issue, we need to look at DACA and a few other things and come up with some sort of sensible immigration policy, because we're going to need that. However, at the same point in time, everyone who's working in Upper Harlem and the Bronx, who's taken an under-the-table job and has displaced a bunch of people that could be making $15 an hour, is not paying Social Security. Okay, and secondarily, migrant workers who are paid by the field, typically. You clear this field, you get paid, are not paying Social Security. So the question is, what is the utility? What is the assessment? And I think a data assessment needs to be done on that to create the effective policy that'll work in between large cities like New York that have a lot of these populations and other parts of the country that have different variegated portions of these populations. At the same point in time, Medicare, Medicaid, look, by wiring the ACA into those programs and assuming that we were going to get one group of Americans paying for another group of Americans, there was a tremendous fault in the last administration. And now what we're doing is we're seeing the fallout of it in real time. We've got policy changes there that need to be addressed in terms of, I think, increasing access to health savings accounts, increasing the ability for some of these companies to compete in multiple states. But then also, what we've talked about is the expenditures inside of these hospital systems. The expenditures are so large and so gross and so mismanaged, and a blockchain type system to optimize that, which, Radiologics is starting on that. A couple other ones are starting on that. VChain has started on that. Need to kind of come in, but there's an overhaul of, I think, the fundamental process by which we push healthcare out that needs to happen. And then I would say, lastly, the challenges of where we go from a power generation perspective are going to be massive. And I'm going to tell you this: coal is cheaper than it's ever been before. And what we don't have to worry about now is more coal plants. What we have to worry about is more coal plants in Latin America, because everything that they're looking at is dependent upon foreign direct investment. In Ecuador, I know 2 coal plants that are going up in Ecuador right now. Why? Because they have available and accessible land, and one of the guys has a coal mine that who's funding the power plant. Do I agree with that? No, and I think we need to be using better, smarter technologies, but we're going to have capacity issues. They just shut down Indian Point, the nuclear reactor, it's in phase 1 of shutdown in upstate New York. So peak demand during the summer of New York, even adjusting for a move out and a reduction in commercial capacity, is still, it was 13.8. It's still going to be about 11.1 gigawatts at peak. Where are you pulling this electricity from? So, and we've already seen in many states they're increasing power prices. So I think the longer term impacts to the average American, more expensive food, more expensive power, and a need for diversification in terms of education and leveling up. I mean, these are terrible, terrible, terrible problems that we're having right now. The economic ramifications are going to be horrible, but I think it's going to require strategies. I agree on the UBI issue. I just don't know. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Andrew Yang. I mean, Yang met with Trump before they started putting this stuff together. We're getting the inklings of bipartisan movement, but it's going to be that kind of stuff that comes together before we can make some serious decisions and progress.
Yeah, I think everyone is, in terms of bipartisanship, I think everyone just needs to see the writing on the wall, and we're up against really big problems. Mm-hmm. Samson, I'd like to turn the floor back over to you for kind of like your last few minutes of podium time, and then I'd like to turn it over to the rest of the team to see if they have any rebuttals there.
First and foremost, since we want to talk about solutions, some representing Kristina Bruhahn, she's a Democrat from Pennsylvania, and this gentleman named Michael Waltz, he's a Republican from Florida. They floated out developing a national public health corps, which I think is a great idea, but that requires us to invest locally, invest in infrastructure, invest in education and nurses, because you don't just get a nurse or a healthcare worker overnight. I also think if you want another solution, we need to take the appointment of CDC and NIH directors, make them 10-year appointments, and do them sort of like we do some federal judges. Make them off years. You have that person, because that would prevent them from feeling intimidated or that they're going to get fired or something. That would be super helpful. We do need to invest in public health. That's never been very popular, investing in public health. And the reason we need to invest in public health, because whenever you commoditize health, you're going to have profiteering. And so I know this because blockchain fundamentally does not work for supply chain. The reason it fundamentally does not work for supply chain, the moment I want something, I know a guy. I don't care where you have it on your blockchain, I know a guy. And so whether it's PPE, respirators, ventilators, whatever it is, I know a guy. Even if it's on a blockchain system, I still know a guy. I pick up the phone, I call them, whether they're in Pachuca, Mexico, or in China, and I know a guy and I can get it here. Blockchain fundamentally does not work for anything that has value, because if it has value, there's a black market for it, and I'm just going to create that black market or go to that black market to get it. I do want to agree with Oz that coal is cheap when you ignore the environmental cost. So you can get no cheaper solution than coal when you ignore the environmental cost. There's this stuff called sunlight. It happens pretty often. It's actually not that it's not that expensive, and from an environmental perspective, it's good for the planet.
Samson, just a plug. So hold on just one second. So just a quick plug. CoinGenius has been invited to advise green tech, which is global solutions of very cutting edge green technology, including solar, including wind, including geothermal, including waste and landfills as an energy byproduct, including algae, including all kinds of things they're doing there. So we'll be helping connect the world with solutions like that. So Oz, your guys down in Ecuador, that they had some free land and they were interested in making some money, generating some energy.
But that's not how. That's not how that.
We have solutions for alternatives to coal. That's the only point I'm making here. All right. So really quickly, Samson, if you have any other points on your list, and then we'll turn it over to the rest of the team.
Yeah, JP Morgan Chase, a very small bank, just opened up bank accounts for Coinbase and Gemini that's remotely related. If you can't beat them, join them. It's more of the same. So it's a fresh coat of paint on the historical barriers of economic freedom. That's it.
That's as luck would have it, right?
So Steve, I'll turn it over to you for this.
No, that's just another one of those. As luck would have it, during this time, the Coinbase and Gemini happened to open accounts with Gemini. I don't know. Like I said, there's rule in fighting. Once coincidence, or once an accident, twice a coincidence. Third time, it's a meaningful occurrence. So 1, 2. All right, wait for 3. But yes, I agree. It's probably not coincidence.
So the short version, Steve, here, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, it's easier for a religion to take over if you take parts of the previous religion and you kind of adapt yourself into it. And I think that that's a bit of what's happening here. Not to mention, from a project management standpoint, JP Morgan couldn't figure out how to make their coin work. They couldn't figure out the internal workings of the routing. It's really a lot easier to just watch somebody else, how they manage their project, and then try and replicate it, than it is to try and build something fresh from the ground up, which is another strategic piece on JP Morgan. JP Morgan is obviously moving into this digital currency age. They don't understand it enough, and they need it to still align with their status quo, which it doesn't. So we're going to see some interesting kind of Darwinian pieces move forward and some fall off. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen. All right, I'd like to turn it over to the rest of the team, Tim Bogert, Jeremy Bourne, Thomas, and anyone else who we might have on the line today. Feel free to jump in and add your commentary.
Speechless, I understand.
So always happy to jump in. I didn't even want to jump in the middle of that conversation. I mean, between Samson and Oz, I mean, that was just sheer entertainment because you guys, not only do you guys come from, you're looking through two different lenses, but I mean, you guys have data to prove both sides. So it's very interesting for an outsider to listen in to understanding the implications of both of these things that are going on simultaneously, as well as obviously everything that we know on the data and analytics side, and just, looking at from a data science perspective, what's going to happen with COVID-19, potential reinfection, what's going on obviously in the blockchain and crypto space, specifically around particular coins and decouplings. And, really our focus is on regimes and regime changes. So identifying the regimes that we're in currently from a trading perspective and how those are very interrelated to other asset classes as well. So anyway, this is something that we're keeping an eye on. Our data science team is very, very busy. We have access to tremendous amounts of data. It's just a matter of how do you sift through it and derive valuable insights. So, whoops, I think I just got kicked off. So that's our main focus there. But in relation to a lot of the conversation that you guys have been having, my personal opinion is that we are going to be experiencing a cleansing over the next 6 months. It's going to be a very Darwinian moment in our evolution of our species. And, you know, to Kristina's point and some of the things you guys alluded to, there's just a lot of people that just won't ever have access to good education and communication mechanisms with people like yourselves that are very highly and well versed in specific topics and areas that others just aren't, right? And a lot of people, unfortunately, in this world are just lazy, and that's what technology does. It makes people more lazy, right? Every single day, and it makes them, you know, lack the want or ability to get outside and do something because they can just sit in their home, they can conversate, and they can, you know, basically run business and do everything, and even have robots clean their floors. So with that said, we're creating a very lazy society that doesn't instill a feeling of wanting to educate and grow as individuals. Therefore, it's going to make a lot of people put in a very peculiar situation as it relates to dealing with what is yet to come, with COVID-19 and all the breakdown and supply chain, all the things we've been talking about. So from my perspective, there's going to be a massive cleansing, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And Coin Genius, all we're doing on our side is trying to educate the public as much as possible and giving them the tools and data points that we can to equip them best to understand how to not only survive, but hopefully thrive.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Do we have anyone else who is in attendance who has not spoken yet who'd like to chime in?
Can I speak to an issue of leadership? If someone else doesn't want to hop in.
So long as
I'd like to make one comment.
So long as you don't mention the previous administration, you can speak about leadership.
I'm not talking about either of those things. I'm talking about local.
Hold on, Oz. Was that Thomas that just?
Yeah, I want to make one comment. One thing I've always told my kids when people say, oh, the government should pay for this or that, I say take the word government and replace it with the word neighbor and see if you come up with the same answer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think your neighbor should pay for your college? Do you think your neighbor should pay for this or that? Too many times people say government and they think it's just something that comes out of thin air. It ultimately has a cost.
Well, I'm going to chime in there because this is Tim. What I witnessed back at the last recession was one of the most massive transfers of wealth in history. And what I'm witnessing here is a repeat performance where we have little oversight as to where this money's going from the government to bail out largely large institutions and companies that theoretically, due to their knowledge and their experience, should be able to at least weather a storm while we are paying for that as taxpayers. So if I'm going to ask my neighbor to bail out a large corporation, I would certainly ask my neighbor to bail me out and let me go to college and let me have health care.
If you're going to benefit from college,
a lot of it,
you're going to benefit from college, why should I pay for it?
We got here. So
Either college
Thomas,
has benefits or it doesn't. Why should someone else pay for it?
No, I look at it this way. I think under the Obama administration, we should allow all of the big banks to crash. But unfortunately, that would have done a tremendous disservice to most American mortgage holders because the asset-backed situation just took, it took everything out from that industry by its legs. But when you talk about leadership, I think the bigger problem that we're going to have is outside of people's issues with presidents, okay, is that corporate leaders should have been prepared. And most corporate leaders want to spend less than 1% of their total budget a year on technology. And we start talking about supply chains and these other things. Samson, I understand the cronyism perspective, right? But in many cases, like when we got into the PPE business and I started working with one of the guys who was on the board of Pack Global, he had 10, 15 vendors. We are now talking to about 100 different vendors. And what you're doing is you're round robining, bidding this stuff out. But, to your point, unless you have the technology to do that, maybe you end up going to a guy or something like that. That does happen in many cases. But the supply chain can be augmented. It can be fixed. But the bigger problem with leadership I see is what Jeremy said. And so one of my Republican district leaders, Ruby Wright, died at 99 right before Corona, and that was about a month ago. Across the aisle, Akil Rose, who was nonpartisan and had worked on everything from the Harlem Emergency Network to figuring out how we run Kwanzaa events, this, that, and everything else. He died, and we've had a lot of local leaders die recently, and these are all people who were between the ages of 55 to about 70. And one of the bigger issues I see is that if a lot of us just don't start stepping up to the plate, I mean, look at Congress right now. Congress has more what are they called? Great War generation people in Congress than it does millennials and Generation X combined. Okay, like these are the challenges. The challenges are when people have to go into court and bring in special experts to explain to judges what Java is inside of a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit with Oracle. What do you think is going to happen when they have to start explaining blockchain on the floor inside of about a year? And in addition to which, this administration has, and this is now 3 administrations deep where this stuff started, but the blockchain rollout is starting in 21 from the federal government forward. And a lot of this is designed to rip all that cronyism out, because there's a ton of pork barrel spending that's tied into old bills, old taxation laws. I mean, for the love of God, the Johnstown flood in Pennsylvania, you're talking about Houlihan's, they own a restaurant chain outside of Pittsburgh. That's where my family's from. The Johnstown flood tax is still in play, and people are still paying it years after that was paid for. There has to be some new accountability inside of these systems, not just in the state and the federal level. And a lot of that I think is going to come from the technology. But if people don't start taking this stuff seriously, watch a lot of these companies whose supply chains are failing are going to be replaced by better systems that come. I mean, and that's just the nature of the beast.
I want to say that tech doesn't solve human problems, humans do. And so you can have the most fanciest tech in the world. If we cannot reach this magical thing called consensus, it's never going to work.
I'm just telling you that if you have the option to buy from 10 vendors versus 1, the tech's at least moving in the right direction.
So whatever PPE you need, I know a guy. His name is Samson. You have his phone number. Just call me.
I'm calling you.
Oh,
right
and by
after
the
this.
way, 20% margins is what makes America great.
20% maximum margins. 20% maximum.
That's a start. That's a start, man.
Maximum now, dude. You'll get arrested by the FBI.
Hey, Kristina.
Yes, sir.
I guess this, having worked on Wall Street, I try not to speak negatively about any but I'm a data and chart person, kind of always have been. So I'll what we talk about bailouts, and sometimes, I don't know, we tend to throw good money after bad, and it's really almost incomprehensible. I just want to show you guys one chart, and it's Citibank stock since inception. I'm not going to say good, bad, or whatever. I'm sure people have made money long and short, but I just want to I want everyone to see this, to really see what actually has happened through that bailout. I don't know if you can, if I have to move this thing over, but
Yep, you're good.
here. This is Citibank stock. So this was 1977. This was 1998. This was 2007. This was 2009. This is now. So sometimes problems may end up being covered up a little more, and we don't really see this chart too much on TV, but I think this is kind of a microcosm for sometimes things are almost too big to fail, where if I zoom this out and go like this, I don't know if you can see this, but I don't know if you can. In any event, you get my point.
Yeah, basically that it used to be up around 600, and now it hovers for the last decade or so around 40, 50, never breaking 100.
Oh, sure. Well, without going into specifics, yeah, it's, they're derivatives bets. I mean, all options are, and all these things that I'll say myself, collateralized debt obligate, letter terms that most people have never heard of in 2008 and 2009 became mainstream. These are things that are basically financial engineering. Like, I put 10 mortgages together that are shit, and I package 100 of them. It's like, oh yeah, the chances of this failing is small. Yes, you're right. The chance of all 100 failing are small, but the chance of 20, the probability didn't change. So that's all I'll say. So I'm kind of adding on to a comment Mr. Sultan made, where I agree with a large portion of that, somebody makes bad bets. I mean, I don't know many traders that get that contract that say, hey, Steve, we're going to hire you. Every losing trade we'll take. Every winning trade, you get your performance bonus on. Because I'm looking for one of those deals. If anyone out there is offering, my name's Steven Quan. You can reach me at steve.quan@geniusxv.com.
This is true. And actually, Steve, that's a really great segue for wrap up here. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the commentary. I even appreciate the conflict. I like hearing the different sides of the data interpreted from different folks. The short version is out to the audience. If you are considering evaluating one of these massive problems and applying blockchain technology to it, where you see that there could be a solution, we want to hear from you. And if you have ideas about what you'd like our panel to talk about, what you'd like to dive into more in depth, please reach out to us at info@coingenius.ai. You can also follow us in real time on our CoinGenius Discord and join the conversation and ask these kind of questions, whether it's market movement, whether it's having questions, whether it's mining, whether it's, you know, bigger government legislation impacts. We talk about all things related there. So feel free to join the conversation. And we will also be having our next collective intelligence seminar or summit coming up on June 25th and June 26th. Where we're going to be doing deep dives into a lot of these topics. In the meantime, you can go to our website, coingenius.ai, and you can actually review some of the commentary from our last Collective Intelligence Summit, where Oz and Samson and Steve get into much bigger concepts. So thank you for joining us today. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to send them over on the channels that I previously outlined. I am Kristina Bruhahn, and this is Genius Wednesdays. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.